What's up, everyone? Welcome to the podcast. Today we'll be talking about lab-grown meat. We will be discussing the science behind the process of growing it, as well as the pros and cons of it. We thought that this would be an interesting topic because we have heard crazy-sounding rumors about lab-grown meat, like it being cultivated from cancer cells, which sounds scary. Upon hearing these rumors, we knew that this was a topic we should take a deep dive into and consider from an objective point of view. It is also constantly in the news lately, especially with it being approved by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Before we get into it, let's go around and introduce ourselves.
Yo, what's up, guys? I'm Forbis.
And I am Preston Plaisted.
Hey, guys, I'm Otto. Now, to start this podcast off, we'll bring it back to Ethan.
I'll start off by starting about the science and history behind this process of lab-grown meat. So, lab-grown meat refers to any meat that's developed from an animal cell culture. It does not involve the traditional cycle of raising and killing animals to harvest their meat. Lab-grown meat is also known as CM, which is an acronym that stands for cultured, clean, or cell-based meat. Most scientists can agree that the start of CM rose in the mid-90s, but didn't really pick up speed until the start of the 2000s. Around this time, there were a number of pioneering researchers that helped to kickstart this brand new field. According to an article titled Making Sense of Making Meat on Frontiers.org, two separate independent projects were producing tissue around the turn of the millennium. One of these projects was led by a researcher at Touro College Applied Bioscience Research Consortium named Dr. Morris Benjamin. Benjaminson thought that being able to grow CM would be able to provide astronauts with a low-weight solution for the issues of food during long-term spaceflight. Benjaminson applied for funding and received funding through NASA's Small Business Innovative Research Program. To conduct his experiment, he sliced 2 to 4 inch sections from goldfish and placed them in fetal bovine serum.
Hold on, man. Did you say goldfish meat? That sounds absolutely disgusting.
I know. That sounded really weird to me, too. I couldn't really find any information on why he chose goldfish meat as opposed to, chicken or something, but I imagine it must come down to, efficiency. So, with the goldfish, it's more practical to have a large quantity in lab as opposed to chicken meat, which is my theory on it. But continuing on, according to an interview with Benjaminson in an ABC News article titled Scientists Grow Meat in the Lab, he reported a 16% increase in size for the fish meat. He also conducted the same experiment with chicken muscle meat with similar results. There were no tests done about the consumption of this CM, as it was far from FDA certified, and prion disease was a possibility in the fetal bovine serum.
Hold up. With the fetal bovine serum, does that mean that lab-grown meat is considered vegan?
So, I think this is a common misconception surrounding lab-grown meat. It's created from real animal cells that are incubated in a broth of animal-derived fluid, such as bovine serum in this case. However, many vegans would appreciate the fact that lab-grown meat is taken in more ethical ways that allows for the animal to not have to be killed or really harmed in order for the meat to be collected. The other research project that occurred around this time was led by Anna, Zur, and Oren Katz. Originating from a residency at Harvard Medical School in 2000, this project took an artistic approach and involved the creation of semi-living steak and prenatal sheep cells. The term semi-living cells that they're talking about are cells and tissues that are isolated from organisms and coerced to grow in predetermined shapes. While the semi-living processes some of these characteristics of life, they require numerous laboratory technologies and human interventions in order to survive. Subsequently, the project advanced to cultivate steaks using frog cells. In 2003, these steaks were eaten as part of an exhibit in l'Art Biotech of France. And two examples were far from the only research being conducted on CM. In Frontiers.org article goes on to explain how there are many other projects fueling this new space, such as with Tor Lee and Stig Almha and the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, who both grew fat and cartilage from pig umbilical cords. This was used as a way of experimenting with the creation of other aspects of the animal. Throughout the 2000s, these individual research projects continued, but they each faced one main problem: funding. It seemed as though CM was a concept that blurred the lines of what designated funding. This project faced challenges in securing funding as it diverged from the typical interest of both tissue engineering and food research funders. It aimed to create food through tissue engineering, making it less aligned with the preferences of either funding category. A major turning point came in 2011 when Mark Post of Maastricht University was interviewed in the New York Times, saying that this technology was already available to grow muscle cells into animal protein in the lab if the money was available to do it. Shortly after this, an undisclosed donor swiftly provided the funds, prompting Post to initiate a program for crafting the first ever lab-grown hamburger. In 2013, The financial supporter was disclosed as Sergey Brin, who's a co-founder of Google, during a press conference where the burger was prepared and sampled. Now that we have discussed some of the history behind lab-grown meat, or CM, I will talk about some of the actual science behind it. The first step in growing CM is extracting stem cells from the desired animal. Stem cells are eukaryotic cells that have the ability to renew themselves as well as to many different cell types in the body. According to the National Institute of Health, there are two main types of stem cells, pluripotent and somatic, also known as adult stem cells. Early mammalian embryos and blastocyte stage contain two types of cells, cells of the inner cell mass and cells of the trophectoderm. The trophectodermal cells contribute to the placenta. The inner cell mass will ultimately develop into the specialized cell types, tissues, and organs of the entire body of the organism. On the other hand, adult stem cells serve as an internal repair system and are associated with specific anatomical locations. For CM, the stem cells taken from the animals are typically somatic and are converted into induced pluripotent cells through viral or non-viral mediated gene transfer. When these stem cells are collected, they are placed in a bioreactor and given an oxygen-rich cell culture medium made up of basic nutrients such as amino acids, glucose, vitamins, and inorganic salts, and supplemented with growth factors and other proteins. Bioreactors are vessels that provide an environment where organisms can convert biochemicals into products and are often used for growing cells. Changes in the medium composition trigger immature cells to differentiate into the skeletal muscle, fat, and connective tissues that make up meat. The differential cells are then harvested, prepared, and packaged into final products.
Thanks, Ethan. We appreciate the background and the history. We're going to send it over to Isaac now.
Yeah, Ethan, that sounds like a great idea, but what are some negative aspects to lab-grown meat? Let's dive into that now. For starters, let's focus on what we're actually talking about here. I mean, taking away real meat from its source, like steak, ground beef, chicken wings, things we all love, just doesn't sound appetizing to me. Hunting for and preparing meat is an innate aspect of our human history, and to take that away just seems out of place. While the modern world today boasts numerous scientific advantages, making lab-grown meat is not their best use. Let's dive into some of the disadvantages and potential problems that lab-grown meat poses. With the current process, lab-grown meat is actually not as efficient and environmentally friendly as we had hoped and believed it would be. The University of Davis, California, recently produced an article titled Lab-Grown Meat's Carbon Footprint Potentially Worse Than Retail Beef. In her article, Amy Quinton states that the current system of culturing pharmaceutical-grade animal cells to grow meat in high quantities has an environmental impact that is orders of magnitude higher than retail beef. She goes on to state that the current production system uses highly refined or purified growth media that is both costly to purchase and inefficient for the environment. In its summary remarks, the same article reveals an almost terrifying statistic. The study found that the global warming potential of lab-based meat using these purified media is 4 to 25 times greater than the average for retail beef. With all the beneficial claims that lab-grown meat has regarding environmental impact, this statistic shocked me. I know that the meat production market is somewhat inefficient and detrimental to the environment, but given that scientists' best alternative, lab-grown meat that is 4 to 25 times worse, we need to stick with our current methods. Let's touch now on the strange and seemingly alien aspect of eating lab-grown meat. It sounds like something out of a utopian or sci-fi movie, and rightly so. Labs all around the world have invested vast amounts of money into this field with no clear answers to this day. That said, some labs have successfully produced gelatinous substances that have similar qualities to real meat. However, the combination of synthetic and derived animal products with a sped-up growth process has produced some potential problems. In one of their articles titled Lab-Grown Meat 53 Hazards Identified by FAO and WHO, the European Livestock Voice gives an in-depth look at how lab-grown meat is potentially harmful. They outline the 4 categories of production, namely cell procurement, cell growth and production, cell harvesting, and food processing. One of the biggest concerns outlined by the FAO and the World Health Organization in the article are the potential contaminants found in lab-grown meats. They list heavy metals, micro and nanoplastics, allergens from certain additives, chemicals, antibiotics, and even prions as potential contaminants.
Oh man, prion sounds pretty scary. Are you saying this could give you like mad cow, CWZ, zombie people walking around now?
I mean, for sure. With the use of animal serum, it is highly likely that prions can be transferred to humans without some serious testing or regulation. Nevertheless, none of those contaminants sound like something I want to be eating, especially when the texture is already synthetic and the taste is subpar. Some other concerns listed in the article include the potential loss of societal impacts that livestock has on communities, and the severe difference in quality of the meat is claimed to be sensory, nutritional, and textural properties, while important quality-enhancing steps in transforming muscle into conventional meat are missing still. So with that said, it doesn't sound like it's too good for the community, and we're not even all the way there to getting it perfectly dialed. The article also discusses the potentially carcinogenic effect that lab-grown meat could have on humans. This comes down to the induced growth of cells, which is sped up by quote-unquote growth factors and hormones. That could have impacts on metabolism, and they have been linked to the development of certain cancers, according to that article. Now, to rewind a little bit, let's talk about the negative aspects of lab-grown meats in relation to the negative impacts of natural meats. To me, many of the negatives that lab-grown meats pose are similar, if not identical, to that of natural meat. When we look at it in depth, we can see the similarities. They are both potential carcinogens, they can both be contaminated with dangerous compounds, and they are both bad for the environment. In my mind, though, the negatives of lab-grown meat far outweigh those of natural meat, especially since studies show that lab-grown meat is worse for the environment and the nutritional benefits are far less than natural meats. Let's take the knowledge that we have gained from our attempts at lab-grown meat and put it to use on natural meats. Let's take our scientific advancements and make the meat we love even better for us and for the planet. Let's leave the jello meat in the lab and focus on the future of natural meat production.
Thanks, Isaac. That's going to be pretty tough to argue against, especially considering the fact that I have my personal biases towards lab-grown meat. You know, I'm a hunter, always grew up that way, love a good steak, but there were some really cool things I found throughout my research that make me have a little more positive opinion towards it anyways. The thought of lab-grown meat just makes me turn my nose up a little. But the most interesting thing, which is the potential health benefits of lab-cultured meat. A scientific paper on the in vitro meat production claimed that meat could be genetically engineered to be healthier. They made claims such as harmful saturated fats could be replaced by healthy fats like omega-3, and even claimed that certain vitamins could be added in the growth process. Within the same article, they bring up the diseases, illnesses, and parasites that are passed through the current meat production process, claiming that in vitro meat production is a potential solution to this issue. I mean, if it could potentially be healthier for you, maybe I'm for it. Another potentially resolvable issue through lab-grown meat is ecological damage due to livestock. With less amount of livestock required for humans' total average consumption, the animals kept could be given more humane lives. The total land required to raise cattle humanely and healthily would drastically increase. Some positive externalities of this would be ability to reforest and less emission of greenhouse gases from factory farming. A paper by Tomiyama and his colleagues estimated that livestock production contributed 14.5% of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. Now, after listening to Isaac, it sounds like potentially more of that can come from lab-grown meat, but if there was a way to lower it, maybe we could get on board. Just a few lines down the paper, they point out something that I never really would have thought of, which is that the amount of antibiotics used to keep cattle healthy, likely due to the conditions that they are kept in, contributes massively to antibiotic resistance. Even claiming that antibiotic use in these cattle is responsible for 2 million antibiotic-resistant infections and over 23,000 deaths per year in the U.S. Though the two major arguments seen for implementing lab-grown meat are health and preservation of the environment, there are some other unique reasons for implementing lab-grown meat. As I was reading the first article, there were a few that I never would have thought of, one of which was exotic meat. Stem cells from these animals could be used to develop meat. The exotic meat trade threatens certain endangered species like sea turtles, and making exotic meat available to purchase to the public through in vitro production could potentially help the populations of these endangered animals and give those looking to try these exotic meats a chance to do so. Another interesting reason given for the production of lab-grown meat was space travel, as mentioned earlier, settlement of other planets, and the survival of nuclear warfare if it were to ever come to that. Even though it seems out there, it kind of does make sense. A regenerative food source that is rich in protein and creates little waste would be very practical. A controlled ecological life support system would not only provide fresh food to the astronauts, but also deal with waste and provide oxygen and water. That was a quote from a study by Sasha and Trumbo in 1996 and Benjaminson et al. In 1998. This makes even more sense because lab-grown meat is produced much quicker than the time it takes to raise and harvest livestock. In vitro system takes significantly lower time to culture the meat and takes several weeks instead of months for chickens or years for pigs and cows before the meat can be harvested. As the time for which the tissue has to be maintained is much less, the amount of energy and labor required per kilogram of in vitro meat cultured is much lower. So, there are, as Isaac said, lots of detriments and maybe even just some biases towards lab-grown meat or towards real meat, but in the end, there are some cool things and maybe some reasons why we could potentially implement lab-grown meat.
For sure, Preston. There are a lot of positives and negatives to this whole issue of lab-grown meat, but I, for one, am super biased against it. But you did bring up some interesting points. If I really wanted to, I could eat a sea turtle now and do so legally. But thanks again for having me, and I'll turn it over to Ethan.
Yeah, for sure. Overall, I think whether you're with it or not, it's a super interesting process, and it applies really heavily in our daily lives. And if you're any focused on pre-health or bioengineering or anything like that, it's definitely an interesting topic that I think only is going to get more relevant in the future.